Hey, welcome to Silicon Heartland sessions. And part of what makes our community so special are the great leaders in our IT community. And today I'm talking with Connie Matthews Reynolds, who is the CEO and founder of ReynCon. Thanks for joining me today, Connie.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I know you are a very active leader in our community, and when I was out there looking for folks to interview, especially as it relates to security, everybody was saying you got to go talk to Connie. So, so thanks for being here today.
I always joke and say I pay people really well to say nice things about me.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, keep doing it. Whatever you're doing, it's working. So, first of all, you're the founder and CEO of a company called ReynCon,
Yeah.
and I'm just curious, what is ReynCon, and what do you do?
Yeah. So ReynCon is a cybersecurity consulting and training company. So we work with a lot of the small and mid-sized companies to help with their overall security posture. And then really our core focus is training and development, working with organizations from the beginning, like security awareness, all the way up to very technical training offerings. And so we really work to align with an organization and what they need their people to understand better and to develop their people to the next level, and to be able to for continuous improvement in their job.
Got it. And do you just operate here in Columbus, or is your footprint larger than that?
Yes, so obviously headquartered here in Columbus,
Mhm.
but we have worked with some global customers, and we've actually done some training with a bank in Austria a couple years ago, and so
Wow.
we work primarily in the Columbus market, but we're not, limited to that. We do have clients on the West Coast and like down in the South as well.
Right, right. Well, that's very interesting, and I love what you're saying about, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to delve into this, but how technology is one big piece of what you do, but I imagine if you were to sort of balance the technology piece with the people piece and the
Mhm.
importance of as you said, literacy and awareness and so forth. I sort of would guess that the people side of the equation is probably just as important as the technology, even more potentially.
Yes, for sure. In the training that we do, we really try to focus more of things that people can bring back into the workforce. So I'm not saying that certifications are not good, because they absolutely are, but sometimes it's focusing on getting people to pass the exam, where we're really trying to align the training with the business and where they need to go and where they might want to do. So for an example, we just recently did a course teaching auditors how to use PowerShell. Were they experts
Mm.
in PowerShell? No, but they could use PowerShell, some basic, things that they could do that help them on their risk assessments. And so that was something that, they were specifically wanting to be able to solve and help with a business problem and how they did their assessments. And so we built that course out to really support that.
Right. And are you finding that with technologies like PowerShell, that other technologies like emerging technologies like generative AI are helping to enhance their ability to use those tools more quickly and more effectively?
Yeah, and I think, with AI, it's more about the guardrails that you put in place. It shouldn't be just like anything, you shouldn't just like roll something out without understanding the risks that are associated from using, generative AI specifically. Obviously, AI has been around for a really long time, but generative AI kind of hit the world in perfect storm. And I will tell you, I actually use it almost, ChatGPT almost every single day. It's helped me be very productive. So something that might have taken me a couple hours now may only take me 15, 20 minutes. And I
Yeah.
use it as kind of like to organize my thoughts, and then I build out from that. And I always tell people, if you're doing research on something you know nothing about, we talk about garbage in, garbage out. Not everything in generative AI is correct. There's misinformation,
Very true.
disinformation. So if you don't really know for sure, then I go to trusted sources to validate what the output is from my questions with, ChatGPT or any of the other ones out there. So I think as long as you know what those guardrails are, and you're using it properly, I think you'll find that you could be very much more productive
Yeah.
in how you do things. But obviously, like making sure people within your organization understand that there are certain things you should not put into open AI, especially the ones that aren't closed to your organization, because there is a possibility there could be data leakage and information that others would find out by putting that in there.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. It's funny, you bring up AI and all of a sudden that's where the conversation
Yeah.
goes, But I tell you what, I really want to focus first, we'll have plenty of time to get to AI. I really want to focus on you.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a bit about your career. You're a CEO, you're a founder. What would you say are the top career accomplishments that have defined your journey? And can can you maybe walk us through a few key moments that were, sort of pivotal in your career as the founder and CEO of ReynCon?
Yeah, so it's, I like to share my story because then others that are thinking about going into cybersecurity know that you don't have to have a typical pathway. So I started my career as a store manager for TJ Maxx, and I got my first store when I was 23 years old. And I was a little overwhelmed, and my dad was an amazing leader. I grew up in a military family. He served, for a little over 20 years in the Air Force, and lived all over the world. And so I really talked to my dad a lot about, as a young person, most of the people that worked for me were way older than me. And I always truly believe respect is earned. It's not a given. And I really honestly don't care about titles for me. It's about the individual person and how they respect. But I will say that taught me so much about dealing with people, dealing with things I had no control over. And I think that was that foundation of my career that's allowed me to, to be where I am. And obviously at 23, I was managing a $12 million store, had, several hundreds of people reporting to me, 4 to 5 assistant managers, and was one of the best stores on paper operational. But I learned so much about
Wow.
leadership and how you work with people and how you overcome obstacles. And then from there, I actually went into nonprofit work and did event planning, communications, and technology. And I did outreach with junior high and high school students, talking to the kids about careers in the construction industry. And then from there, I went to an IT training and consulting company and worked there for about 5 years. And I kind of got bored. And then I started my security pathway about 18, 19 years ago. And about 7 years ago or six, COVID always messes my years up. I
We
decided
both.
to go out on my own, and I have always had that entrepreneurial spirit. But it was something I was a little afraid of because I wasn't like, a lot of security companies are started by really deep practitioners. Yes, I'm a practitioner in many ways, but I don't have like deep technical knowledge as far as like I couldn't be a pen tester. I mean, if I wanted to, I could probably do it, but that's just not where my interest is. And really, I love to help people. And so, me being able to start my own company gave me the opportunity to really impact corporations and all of the people that work for these companies, their lives in a positive way. And so, that's how I kind of fell into starting my own business. And now it's been like a 6 or 7 years again. I can't remember, and it's been great. And the journey's been it's been interesting at times. And, I think COVID really changed things. I started my company right before COVID, and I was
Wow.
focusing on training, and all of that dried up because of COVID. So I had to think about what could I do to make sure ReynCon was sustainable. And so for years, I sold professional services, and people started reaching out on services, and then, partnered with some individual learning platforms that I was able to still be able to work with my clients on because we didn't have to pull people into a classroom. And so I
Wow.
think the biggest thing with entrepreneurship is that you really have to figure out ways to be creative. And I'm one of these people, like if something's not working, whether it's like something that I think was the best thing since sliced bread, I have to step back and say, well, I may think that, but no one else thinks that. And so always pivoting. And, I think as a business owner, you have to be resilient. A lot of people think it's great to be your own boss, but you have to remember that when you don't sell anything or your company is not successful, you don't get paid. And so
This is
it's
true.
just one of those things. I always say it's not for the light at heart, but it's really honestly the best decision that I've ever made. And I'm so glad I did it. And honestly, one of the big things I talk about is when I started from my research, I think that was the only second female owned cybersecurity company that's our whole focus is cybersecurity. And
Wow.
I also just kind of stepped back and said, I want other women to see themselves in me, and like really with that, like looking at, if she can do it, so can I. And so I always want to like be able to be that role model to uplift and support, everyone. But I also want to see more diversity in women in the
Mhm.
industry, and minorities as well. And so that's a big focus of mine, is really supporting those organizations to provide those opportunities.
Wow, that's amazing. Obviously, you've had your share of ups and downs as you've decided to take your career in this trajectory. Do you think you got this resilience from being raised by your dad and traveling the world and the lessons that he taught you?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, by the time I was 15, I'd lived in Germany, Japan, Texas, England, Florida, and Ohio. So from
Wow.
the time I was born, I was actually born in Germany, on an Air Force base. And so from the time I was born, change has always been a huge part of my life. And so, yes, I mean, as we get older, like we don't like a ton of change, but I actually enjoy change because it's been part of my life and I get bored easily. And honestly, in the 18 plus years of being in cyber, I've never been bored. So this is the longest career I've had time wise. But I think it's because it's always evolving. And I grew up with my dad being in the Air Force, and we lived in other countries. So, like during the holidays and things like that, my parents would invite the young men and women that were in other countries that didn't have family for the holidays. And so, our house was always like very welcoming, and we always had a very diverse group of people, lived in diverse neighborhoods. And it just gave me the perspective of a worldview, because living in other countries, I always say, the United States is not perfect, but it's still a country that we have way more opportunities than a lot of other companies do, or countries, excuse me, do.
Wow, that's amazing. I when I'm listening to your story, again, the word that comes to mind is resilient. And I have to imagine that, over the course of time, especially as the market's gone up and down and of course we had the pandemic and everything else, you've had to have had your share of moments where you had doubt or question your decision in taking your career in this way. For those that are listening that would aspire to being so brave and bold as to say, hey, look, I'm going to go in my own direction here. What kind, when you think about the practices and sort of habits, the things that kept you, going, what would you say those practices and habits are that help you to keep going, that help you to to keep focused on your North Star?
Yeah, and I would say, I try to associate myself with other successful small businesses as well, because there are some unique challenges that people don't really realize you need to go through. And I will say, I mean, I'm not going to lie, there have been times, especially during the COVID years, I started to question whether this is what I was supposed to be doing. And I don't push religion on anyone, but I am a Christian, and I just kept praying about it. And there were times where I'm like, I'm not sure if I am where I need to be. And every time I started to doubt, something happened in my business that made me realize I was supposed to be where I am. And, I was always a very successful salesperson. So my salary has not been what I was used to making, but I was willing to make the sacrifices because I know long term
Right.
money is not my only motivating factor. I really wanted to be able to make a difference in the world. But I think you have to really surround yourself with positive people. I have multiple people that I talk to, from a coach perspective, mentor perspective, that have different qualities. And sometimes if I'm stuck with something, I'll sit down and talk to a few people. And I also do the same for them. And we're always talking about, thank God we have each other, because we were able to help motivate one another. And what makes this a little bit easier for me is building the relationships. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I can honestly say I've never lost a customer in my 25 plus years of being in sales. Now, have people kind of like stopped using me until they needed something? Yes, but I've never been, technically fired from a customer. And it's, for me, it's about building relationships and building rapport and listening and really being a true partner. And I think if you focus on all of the good things that you can offer through the partnership, everything else kind of falls into place. So I don't always worry about the dollars and cents, because I feel like if I do what I'm supposed to be doing, that all starts to follow. And I get pulled into so many opportunities just because of people knowing me and trusting me. And my whole thing is around ethics and integrity and honesty.
Hmm.
That's something my dad always talked about. And, do you act this way when no one's watching or listening? And I mean, truly, anyone that knows me very well, I'm the same person personally and professionally. Personally, I'm probably a little more feisty than I am professionally, but I still am that same person to the core. And I think many times as an entrepreneur, people try to be something they're not. And I can't speak for others, but for me, that makes me very uncomfortable. And I'm not the best version of me if I'm trying to be something I'm not.
Right, right. And like I say, it really for you it comes down to faith, sacrifice,
Hmm.
reaching out to others, embracing coaching, embracing mentoring.
Hmm.
Um, I have to imagine along the way you've probably made some mistakes. As they say, we tend to grow the most when we fall down. When we make a mistake. That's the thing that really builds resilience. So kind of looking back in your career, what are some mistakes you've made along the way, and how did those missteps help you grow?
So I would say, in the beginning of my career, I was young and I lacked some confidence about my ability. And there was just one day woke up and said, you know what, this is who I am. And people are either going to accept who I am or not. And I stopped worrying so much about what everyone else thinks. Not that I don't listen to it, but if it's not constructive and if it's not going to make me be and make me better, then I just kind of ignore it. I think one of the hardest things for me is I'm very, very stubborn. And I don't like to lose and I don't like to fail, but I'm not one of these people that will like walk all over people or try to destroy other people for my own success pathway. But I'm
Right.
very hard on myself. And so sometimes I go through, and if I had to redo things, then would I redo a lot? And honestly, when I look back in my life, there's not really much I would redo, because everything, both positive and constructive, was a learning, it was like a teaching moment, and it helped me to define and be who I am today. So like that stubbornness, I've learned to be able to like let things go. And I always say, sometimes we can't win every battle, nor should we. And so I tend to fight the battles that are really important to me. And, it's like I'll fall on the sword for it. But at some point, you have to just say, you know what, this isn't working. This isn't taking us in the right direction. So you have to let that go. And, I think there's such a fine line between arrogance and confidence. And a lot of people don't understand
Wow.
that line. And I try my hardest to be confident, but not arrogant. But if I feel like I'm getting a little bit closer to that line, I step back and say, knock it off. Like
Mm.
everyone has a story, and, we've all gone through crazy things in our lives. And so having grace and understanding that people change over time and we grow over time. But I think the biggest thing for me is listen to what people say. And if it is something that's you do need to work on, take a step back and work on it. And I ask people all the time, like, is there anything you think that I should work on? And I wake up every day trying to be the best version of me. Not perfect, nor will I ever be perfect, but I do. That's something I challenge myself to every day.
Mm. Wow, I really love that about you. That's amazing. And you mentioned earlier that if you had to choose a theme song for yourself, it would be "This Is Me" from that movie, The Greatest Showman. Great movie and great song.
Yeah.
You've told us a little bit about what that song represents, but I have a feeling that there's a little more to this than we've discussed.
Yeah, and I've shared this story with a lot of people. And when I share the story, I always tell people I don't want you to feel sorry for me, but what I say about is I wouldn't be sitting here today if I would have listened to some individuals in the beginning of my sales career. And so I overheard some of the management team talking, and they said that no one would buy anything from me based on my looks, and it was really based on me being overweight because they've always been a full-figured woman. And I stopped and paused because I was like, they did not just say that. And then I was like, no, they did.
Wow.
And so I literally walked up to them. And so, excuse my language, but I basically told them they could go fuck themselves because I said,
Wow.
listen,
Hell yeah. Good for
you
you.
will not define me. I do. But when I say that, I also think you need to be self aware. And
Yeah.
so I challenged them. I said, let's talk about a year from now, if that had any bearings. And so a year from that point, I went into their leadership meeting, and I brought in 80% of the revenue for the company out of quite a few salespeople. And I literally walked into their
Wow.
office and said, maybe you should hire more fat people. You might make a lot more money. And I walked out and they chased me and I said,
Whoa.
"You know what? I hope this was a learning moment for you because first of all, like failure is not something that I take lightly. I will recognize there's some things I'll never be good at. That to me isn't failure. That's recognizing what you are and who you are, but I will challenge myself. But when they said that, that like fueled me even more. And I think about it today, like I was young and if I would have allowed them to define me in that moment, I have no idea where I'd be today. I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And so that's where I always talk about, and this is me for the people that watch the movie, is that song brings out all the people that have, disabilities, that look different, that think differently. And, I truly believe that, one person is it's based more on what efforts and what they can bring positively into the world. And I have a rule, asshole, no asshole. If you're an asshole, I want nothing to do with you. And that comes in all shapes and sizes. But for me, I want to be surrounded by like positive people. But I share that story more because if there's someone out there that's self-doubting themselves, or they're feeling challenged because of whatever that might be, look within yourself and not don't be afraid to admit what you're strong at, but also challenge yourself to be better too.
Mhm. That had to be a hard year for you after
It
hearing that
was.
conversation and then telling them to go fuck themselves, and then, by the way, I'm gonna prove to you that you're wrong, and then staying there for that year, and then proving to them that they were wrong. That is amazing. I think most people would have just quit,
Well,
not
trust
you.
me, I went into the bathroom, like, afterwards, and I mean, I didn't bawl, but I got, like, pretty emotional because I was just
I
like,
bet.
"Why?" I was young, and I'm like, "Why would someone even say that to someone?"
Yeah,
But it's one of those things that it's a story I do like to share because, you know, as people, we've all had bosses that we work with that are just not good humans. And I've worked with several people that I would say are borderline abusive in my career. And I just said from a young age that I'm not gonna let someone have that much control over me. And it's hard and I'm like a little bit different because I'm the kind of person, if I'm not getting what I want out of a company, I know it's time for me to move on.
yeah,
And I think growing up in a military family and that constant change gives me the strength to do that because I know not everyone has that strength, but that's something I've been always pretty strong about.
right. Well, you say you're a little different, Connie. I would say you're a lot different. I love that about you. That is what an amazing story. So, given the fact that you're in security, very fast moving field, um, we talked earlier a bit about some of the folks that are in the security sphere, how they've influenced you. People like, Teresa Payton and Brian Krebs and Tia Hopkins. I'm curious, can you share with our listeners who these folks are and
Sure.
yeah, and how they might also benefit from being inspired by them.
Yeah. So Teresa was the first female CIO for the White House under the Bush administration. And I recently met her a couple years ago. We've had her twice now for a keynote for the Central Ohio InfoSec Summit, and her and I have become really good friends. And I also like people that aren't afraid to kind of change the look of something. And obviously, for those of you who know, she's a tiny petite woman, but she's a complete badass. And I respect her so much. She's brilliantly smart and she has just pushed and pushed in her career. She also has her own company called Fortalis, and she does a lot with global companies, and she does a lot of speaking on a lot of the trends like deep fake and AI, and she does a lot around identities and rights to privacy and things like that. And so she has several books, and I have both of her books. And I just, again, I'm a sponge. I love to learn, and so I love to listen to her. And she's so down to earth and just a good human overall. And so she's definitely someone to look up. Brian Krebs, for people in cyber, he's probably one of the most famous security bloggers. So I also met him by bringing him several years ago as a keynote for the InfoSec Summit here. And he's also like not afraid to push the envelope. And so he's a great resource for me to kind of keep up. So anytime there's a breach or something new in security, he normally has some commentary on that. And I always tell people, you may not always agree with that person, but he's a great resource to kind of keep in mind, follow him on social media. And he has a lot of good things that he has to say. And then Tia Hopkins, which is another person we had this year, I should say, as a keynote. And then I brought her to our Empower Gala last Friday, and she did a 20-minute keynote. And she's just such a motivational person. She's overcome a lot of obstacles. She's African American lady, very, very, very sharp. Her background and her, like, what she loves doing is resiliency. And a funny story, when we were in San Diego filming a documentary on women in cyber, we got stuck at the airport during CrowdStrike, and both of our phones were like blowing up. And we were seeing the blue screens of death, and we
Yeah.
had lots of delays. She got home way before me. My husband actually had to drive to Atlanta because there were no rental cars or hotels within a 60-mile radius. So we always are laughing about that. And I'm like, you got to spend way more time with me than you ever thought. And so we just kind of laugh, but it gave us a really good opportunity to get to know each other. And I just love, she's just such a positive, like, beaming influence of change and focusing on the positive things of how change can work, instead of like focusing on all the bad things. She focuses on
Right.
how can I impact change. And that's where I think the two of us are very similar in that matter, that
Right.
I'm
I
like,
can see
you can
that.
only talk about something for so long. If there's no rolling up your sleeves and there's no actionable items, you can't really
Yeah.
impact change. So her and I have that in common.
Well said. So you mentioned in there something about a documentary. Are you like in a documentary? Women
Yeah,
in
so
cyber?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
tell us about it.
this summer, um, Tia and myself, and then there was 16 of us ladies. I knew about maybe 35-40% of the women in the documentary, just from, other areas of the country from being in the industry. So they asked us to come out to San Diego and film a documentary, and they did an interview with all of us. And then we had some panel discussions, and we had some keynotes as well. And it was, a small, intimate event, but Amazon actually, I believe, is paying for most of the documentary, and it's supposed to come
Wow.
out towards the end of this year.
Okay.
So I was joking around uh, with everyone and about, this would be fun. And the people are like, oh, we're going to run a movie theater and we're going to do a showing, so we're going to try to do that
That's
once
an
it comes
awesome
out.
idea.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
And then what we want to do is, I actually was my idea. I'm like, if we're going to do that, bring people, let's charge everyone a minimum of $25. And I
Mhm.
was going to split all the proceeds between our ISSA Foundation for scholarships and then the Empower scholarships as a fundraiser. And everyone's like, why do you always want to do stuff for other people? I'm like, because it makes the world a better place. I'm like, I'm not going to ask people to pay to come see me, but I feel like if we're going to bring that many people together, why don't we impact and be able to, maybe we can get a couple scholarships for people in our
That is
community.
awesome. What a cool idea.
Yeah.
I would love to be a part. Are you gonna,
Oh, yeah,
advertise
you'll
it
definitely
on?
be invited. Well, I will
Awesome.
tell
Thank
you
you.
that filming for a movie or documentary kind of thing was really different because I wander, I fidget, my eyes are all over the place because I'm always watching the crowd. Well, they're like, you can't look, you have to look right in the camera. And that was so hard for me. And so the good news, they only had to stop me like 2 times. And I was like, stop moving, stop moving. So yeah, because I am a fidgeter. So, but it was a lot of
Wow.
fun. And I think people will find the messaging very positive. It really
Mhm.
wasn't about bashing anyone. It was about sharing our common, success stories, some of our obstacles, whether
Yeah.
that was with men or women or
Right.
both. And it was just such a phenomenal event. And we started a LinkedIn group with all of us in the documentary, and we're all trying to keep in touch and things like that because everyone was just incredible. So I'm excited to see it,
Heck
because I
yeah.
didn't get to hear all the other interviews either. So it'll be my
Mhm.
first time seeing them too.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank
That
you.
is really exciting. I cannot
Yeah.
wait to hear about it and
I'm trying
to
to make
see
Ohio
it with you.
proud.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. Well, you're doing that and a lot more. So thanks for all that you do. I mean,
Yeah,
speaking
no
of
worries.
that, when you think about the influence that you have here in Columbus and around the world, really, the word that comes to mind is leadership. And you're running a company. You are influencing other companies. You're helping folks to improve their security posture. When you think about leadership and like leadership qualities, what leadership qualities are most important for making a significant impact? And how do you embody those qualities in your day-to-day leadership?
Yeah, I'd mentioned that I grew up in a military family, and um, I
Okay,
can honestly say this without bias: my dad was probably one of the best leaders that I have ever met in my entire life.
I
And I'm
believe it.
not saying it because he's my dad. I literally watched my dad be very, very respected, as well as like keep in touch with the young men and women that served the country when we lived all over the world. At Christmas time, they would send, Christmas cards to my parents. They would come visit my parents because I saw my dad making this positive impact on people. And my dad gave me a couple of words of advice when I first got into a leadership role because I was really young. And the couple things he always said is never forget where you came from, praise in
Okay.
public, be constructive in private. Always never ask someone you to do something you wouldn't want them to do. And I'm not talking so much like, if my dad was never a coder, would he be a coder? No, but I'm talking more about fundamental principles. Like, for example, when I was a store manager at TJ Maxx, if someone made a mess in the fitting room or the bathrooms, if there was no one to do it, I would be in there doing it because who wants to do that? No one. And so that's kind of things is talking about making sure that you are, really leading. And I really consider myself a servant leader, and a lot of people misunderstand that definition. For me, as a leader, I'm only as strong as the team that surrounds me. And I can't be good at everything, and nor can individuals be good at everything. So I like to collectively bring a team together that has different strengths. So as a whole, we're stronger together. And that's just something my dad always talked about is that, as a leader, you could be the best leader, but really are you if your team isn't supporting you and you're not working as one? And the big thing is like I try really to not say I a whole lot. I mean, we sometimes do it, that's
Hmm.
natural, but
Hmm.
everything in my life, could I do all of it by myself? 100% no. So for me, it's about the team and leveraging the team. And I've always just been very fair, very transparent. Like I don't play games. Like you always will know where I stand. And some people don't like that. But I think when you like maybe pull everything back, I'd rather have someone be honest with me than to tell me something that's not really helping me. Because if you're telling me I'm really good at something and I'm not, then I may have a false sense of what my strengths are. And so
Right.
I think being transparent as a leader is really important. And, I don't always, sometimes you have to lead from the front, but I always really have the faith in my team and I step in where I feel they need to. I don't like micromanaging people because I hate being micromanaged. It shuts me down. Now, some people need that, but I'll make that adjustment based on an individual. But those are the
Hmm.
things that really resonate with me as a leader is just, always being there and listening and supporting. And, people go through a lot. And I was the president for the last 4 years for ISSA International. I'm sorry, for ISSA Columbus. And, we had some of our team that were going through some crazy things. And I would call them and text them like, several times a week just to check in. Are you doing okay? Do you need anything? And, I am busy, but the human elements of working with people is very important to me because I always want people to know they can share whatever they need to share with me if they need that support.
Right, right. That's very, very well said. When I think about your leadership style, and you said it, servant leadership, authenticity, demonstrating leadership by jumping into the trenches, don't be, not being afraid to actually getting in and getting your hands dirty. um that's to me, that's the definition of servant leadership. And certainly lessons that I also, I served in the military as well, and some of those lessons I brought as well,
As you
and
know, in the
very
military,
much
I mean, there
resonates.
isn't really an I. If you're on a battlefield, it's going to be your
Yeah,
team. Because if you don't have
yeah,
people beside you,
100%.
you're probably not going to survive and come
Yeah,
home. And so I think a lot of the guiding principles that they teach in the military, I'm not like some of the things are kind of iffy for me, but um,
yeah, me
I
too.
just think the overall principles about team, you got each other's back, all those things are things that I grew up with. And so I'm glad that I had that experience.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. As you've grown your career or grown your company and so forth, and we all go through challenging times. How do you make sure that you sustain the motivation of your team as you're traversing those more difficult waters?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned this a little bit. Like, I'm not saying I haven't failed in things in life because I totally have, but failure is not part of my vocabulary. Like, if something doesn't work or something isn't going the way that I think it should have gone, I realize that I may need to, look at it differently. I may need to go a different direction. But I tend to make a lot of my business decisions based on having conversations with my customers, my clients, my friends, other business owners of saying, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Do you think this makes sense? Do you think I'm crazy? And most of the time, like they're like, no, I love this idea. Like, let's figure out how we can do it. But then, or sometimes they'll say, maybe I like it, but like, have you thought about this? And then I look at it a different dimension. And so I think for me, there's been many times, starting a company before COVID, I had a really large pipeline. It went from, quite a few millions of dollars to zero overnight because of COVID. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I was like, you know what? I got to figure this out. And I just kept trying different things until I saw things that started to stick. And then I focused on what was going to do. And I think the biggest thing about being an entrepreneurial is you can't be so set in your ways that you're not willing to pivot, or you stick with an idea because you think it's a good idea, but no one else around you does. And I think because my background's more marketing and sales and business administration, I think differently than a lot of tech owners that may not have the business background or the sales
Hmm.
background. And I can be technical, but I think having that skill set has helped me really be able to pivot. Because one of the number one things as a salesperson you have to like be able to navigate is overcoming obstacles. So again, like my all of my career, everything that I've done in the past, whether it was in IT security or not, has really helped me and prepared me to be where I am today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As you think about how you've had to pivot, due to various constraints and things you have no control over, within your company, obviously it's important that your people understand and stay aligned towards an ultimate vision for what, RenCon is aspiring to do or aspiring to be. But as you need to pivot, and how do you make sure that your team stays aligned to that common goal, but also flexible enough to where they see the need to change and are able to actually do that and get bought into it and so forth. The change is hard,
Yeah.
and how do you make sure that especially in these you know times
Yeah.
where these waters are who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, not with just
Yeah.
the technology pressures, but the weather and the political landscape and the economy and crazy COVID and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
How do you keep your team aligned to that common vision, but also flexible enough to where if you need to pivot tactically, you can do that with agility?
Yeah. So, My models are probably not completely different, but I don't actually have any employees. I use all contractors, or I would say subcontractors, really. Um, and the reason I chose to go that route, one, is it allowed me to be a little more agile. It also allowed me to kind of ride the waves of, like financials and things like that. But it really, the biggest reason that I chose to go that direction is I want to be able to put the best resource in front of my customers, regardless of what they're asking for.
Hmm.
And because I've been in this industry for so long, I have a lot of connections, and I have quite a few like former CISOs, some of the top app security, cloud security people in the country that work with me, whether it's training or consulting. And it allows me to bring the best of the best, and be a little more agile and flexible with my customers so that we can put the right resource. Because one of the things that, way when I started, when I worked in training in IT, there are still our training centers that, okay, you go take this exam and then you're teaching it the next day with no real world experience. And I didn't want that. Like, it's so required for me. Anyone that teaches for me has to have been a practitioner, has real world experience, because I don't want someone just reading from the book. I want someone to be able to share stories and be able to have deeper conversations that the student, the students in the class want to have, and just take it beyond like, okay, well, this is what the book says, but in real life, this is what I've seen, and then have other people share. So
Right.
it's more aligned with those types of things. And so that's really allowed me to have that pivot. And, security folks are expensive resources. And it doesn't make sense for me to pay someone a ton of money that may do 2 classes a year. And it
Right.
gives them the flexibility to do other things too. And so it's been a win-win. I'm not saying we'll never have, and I have some admin people that help me with some things, but it's really, for me, it's about having that agility and being able to meet my clients where they are versus, forcing a resource that may not be a good fit.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So I know you mentioned, you're not a deep technologist. I don't know. Most entrepreneurs who are running businesses aren't, deep technologists. Um, but I'm curious, given your unique view of sort of the technology space, and in particular what you've seen in your career from a cybersecurity perspective, what technologies are you most passionate about, and how have these technologies influenced your the work that you do at ReynCon?
Yeah, so I always talk about, it's a people process technology problem every single time. And if one of those components are successful and the other ones aren't, it doesn't always work out the way you probably want it to. And for me, I talk a lot about, especially with small businesses, more around the foundations. A lot of times you see these companies wanting to implement all these security tools, but they don't even have the basics done.
Hmm.
And so I talk about, like, when I'm talking to a non-technical person, I'm like, would you build a multi-million dollar home on a sinkhole? Well, we know that anyone with any sense would say no. And the same thing goes with security, is if your foundation is wobbly, it doesn't matter all of the tech stack you have on top of it, it probably will fail. Um, and it's one of those things that over the years I've sold lots of pen testing, and there would be companies that have gazillion tools, and we were still be able to get admin rights, which back in the day, there was not, if you got admin rights, then you had full rights to their network. And so I always talk about those foundational things, but obviously, I mean, that like cloud security and generative AI, obviously AI has been around for a long time. Generative AI kind of hit the world by a perfect storm. And
Hmm.
as we were talking earlier, I use ChatGPT almost every single day. It's helped me be more productive with my time, but it's not my only source. And so when I talk to my clients about generative AI, I think if you completely erase it and say you're not going to do it, then I think you're going to lose very quickly a competitive advantage, because everyone is
Well
embracing
said.
it for the most part. But the most important conversation is, what are the guardrails? And I think we get so stuck on these new flashy technologies. But, when I remember when I started like NT4 to Windows 2000. Very few people had home computers. Most people in the office did not have a computer. And then, year 2000, I mean, it kind of exploded. And everyone was like, oh, computers are going to take our jobs away. Well, they didn't. They just created new jobs.
Right.
In fact, created new jobs and better paying jobs. And I think generative AI is the same way. I mean, remember when no one had laptops and then people took them off, and now our cell phones are our laptops, and people would do bring BYOD, bring your own device. And so for me, it's an evolution. We can't so much worry about the technology itself. Yes, we have to understand it, but we put guardrails in place for everything else that we do. We need to do the same thing with AI, generative AI, and really do a lot of security awareness around to all of your users what the risks are with using AI, what they should and shouldn't put in there. And as an organization, do you have a private instance that stays within your four walls, or are you using just all the open stuff that's available to everybody? And so I think that security awareness is a huge component of kind of getting people to understand the risk associated with it. But I think if even companies that are saying we're stopping it, if you have BYOD, people are using it anyway. So
Right.
you either can
Good
be part
point.
of the solution or part of the problem. And I think just the more you're involved in building out those guardrails, the security awareness components of it's going to help. I mean, people are going to still make mistakes. We're all human. We make
Mhm.
mistakes. It's not just, your end users, it's all of us. And we have to, like, we can either win this battle together and move and have forward progress, or we can lose it together, because we need all of us to improve cybersecurity. It's not just the security department's jobs, it's everybody's job.
Right. And if you think about the way that artificial intelligence is so rapidly evolving, and obviously these tech companies are trying to get to an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, and they're not going to stop until we get there. All signs point to a future where we've got an artificial general intelligence that could potentially outsmart any individual that we've ever, any human in the history of mankind in any sort of field. And I'm curious, as you think about that potential and the power of artificial intelligence tools in the market right now, um, does your thoughts around that framework that you mentioned, people, process, tech, do you think that that's going to change at all, or do you think that AGI is just an artificial intelligence in general is just another technology that will, to your point, further draw a line of demarcation between what technology can and can't do and what humans can and can't do, and essentially how humans can benefit from those technologies.
Yeah, it was funny when everything kind of hit the perfect storm. I was like, man, what is this going to mean for like people getting into our industry? And at first I was like, are we going to have this void? So if you don't have any entry level roles, then you can never have junior, senior, because eventually the juniors and seniors will, come out of the workforce.
Hmm.
But what I really started to think about more was I think actually might help. It's hard to say still because we're still kind of, trying to all figure it out. But I'm almost wondering, like, especially when I think about like logs from security, and same thing on the network. I mean, there's no way people are humanly possible able to get through all of the logs. And you're trying to
Right.
find a needle in a haystack.
Very
There's
true.
some things that you can tune, you can write some scripting, but it's still the amount of data is so immense. And so I feel that AI is going to be able to leverage where we can have our teams focus on what's more important instead of wasting. I don't want to say wasting time because that's not but it is kind of wasting time, not from their perspective, but if you don't look at one thing, that might be your needle in your haystack. So I think that it can make people more productive. And then we could focus on some of the things that we never can get to because we can't even get past the logs. And then I think, from a technical or entry level position, if we can teach people to have critical thinking, problem solving, characters
Hmm.
of those types of skill sets, then we might be able to not hire someone that doesn't have a strong security background, but is really good at looking at patterns, and you can bring other skill sets so they don't have to know everything about cybersecurity, which no one does anyway. But
Right.
I think it could be good. And, it's been interesting because I've heard some companies say we aren't going to use any security vendors that are using AI. I was like, well, then you're going to eliminate pretty much every security vendor.
No
And so
kidding.
we've had to rethink that too, because if you look at almost all the marketing language in all of these security tools, they talk about large language models, they talk about AI, they talk about generative AI. So I don't think AI is a buzzword. Like, we talk about zero trust. People still argue about what that really means. That was, it's kind of it's like there's just so many buzzwords in the industry where I think AI is here to stay. It's not going away. So we had to figure out what that's going to look like. But I do think it could help organizations be better and people be better because they could focus on the real problems versus trying to find the needle in the
That's well
haystack.
said. That's well said. And I agree with you. Like you were saying earlier, I think the thing that, there's so many folks out there that still, really do honestly fear AI taking their job
Yeah,
and annihilating entire careers. And none of us can predict the future.
right.
I mean, the reality is that there will be disruption. What the extent of that disruption is going to be, well, we'll find out. But to your point, if that's your framework for moving forward, I think it's a flawed framework. I think the
Yeah.
framework that we all ought to be thinking about is, being my job being taken away by some other human who can put artificial intelligence to better use than I can. And when you think about our businesses,
Mhm.
I want to, our business strategy should be looking at leveraging artificial intelligence to the extent possible, because there are other companies out there, I promise you, they're doing the
Mhm.
exact same thing. And if they can find very specific ways to leverage artificial intelligence to differentiate and to get their
Mhm.
products to market faster and to grow the top line and things like that, then they're going to win.
Well, and I think, I think about just about everything. When I've worked with pretty much every major company in Columbus and a lot of small, mid-sized companies. And when I look at, the larger ones, no two are identical. Their risk postures are
Yeah.
different. The way they look at things are differently. And that's where I think the human element is so important because yes, you can have all this input, but then someone needs to massage it and make sure,
Hmm.
is it really legitimate? Is it really something that we need to escalate immediately, or is there other priorities? Because the thing is that the machine learning and the AI engines and all of that, they're only as good as the data that's put in them. And so, like, for example, when the SEC came out with a new ruling for publicly traded companies and breach
Hmm.
notifications, I remember I used ChatGPT like pretty much within a month of when it was finalized. And it basically came back and said, you need to go to other sources. And there was nothing in there. And so that's the thing, that's the human side of things. Things evolve because of humans too.
Right.
And you have the bias with AI too. So I always like, because of being in security, I'm probably a little more paranoid than the average person. But think about like self-driving cars. Let's talk about who's actually writing the code for that. What if they hate men? What if they hate women? What if they don't like kids? What if they don't like elderly people? What if they don't like gay people? Like they don't like minorities? There's all these things. And that bias, if that's not being checked, in when you're in a car accident, is there always one way out? Like many times it could be the only way out is you're still going to hurt someone.
Yep.
So how does that car make that decision? There's no
Well
thought
said.
process in that.
Yep.
There's not like, I shouldn't say there's a thought process, but no like human interaction process with that. And so that's where it's like, yes, they can make things better. And the way people drive more, maybe it would be better for self-driving cars because no one pays attention anymore, I feel like, on the road. But it's just one of those things where I
Yeah.
think you still have to have that human element because the big thing that none of this technology takes into consideration are people.
Right. Well said. And just maybe another analogy, we talk about self-driving cars. There are all kinds of technologies that are coming
Mhm.
out that use artificial intelligence that are being used by companies to make decisions on behalf of their policyholders.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of these technologies are proprietary. We
Yep.
have no transparency into how these models are being built and the kind of data that they were trained on. who's to say whether there's bias built into them or not?
Yeah.
So given sort of how where we are with this lack of transparency and the rapid evolution of these technologies, what advice would you give to organizations looking to improve their privacy and security posture as these technologies rapidly evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of talked a little bit about this earlier is I think companies need to focus first on creating a strong foundation of their security posture. Because if there isn't a strong foundation, you can buy all these tools, you can implement all of these things, but that may not stop the bad things from happening. Maybe could it possibly, but maybe not. And again, it's kind of like, anything you do, if you don't have a strong foundation, it can crumble very quickly. And so when I talk, especially to the small and mid-sized companies, they're like, "Oh, I want to buy this technology, and this technology." And I'm like, I'm not saying we shouldn't look at that, but we got to take a couple steps back. And so I talk about, I mean, some babies go from not crawling to or go right to walking, but crawl, walk, run. And security is a journey. It's not a destination. You can't just do it one time and you're good. As we know, it changes constantly, and the legislative and the regulations are constantly changing. And I am a firm believer if you focus on the basics and foundation, when all of the regulations and all of those things change, you maybe need to make small movements. But what I've seen over the years of doing this is people are chasing compliance, and compliance is like the bare minimum. And a lot of organizations realize compliance and security are not the same thing, though they do marry in many ways and they
Mm,
work together. We got to take it beyond that, because we know that some of the things that we're seeing, they're not always the basics. Sometimes, there are some things that happen that none of us could have predicted or been able to prepare for in all ways. And I would say, with recent activities, the resiliency and your disaster recovery business continuity is very, very, very important, whether you're a small or large organization. With ransomware and, some types of software that can be shut down and all of those things, you have to look at yourself and say, if I was down for a week, would I still be in business? And
right.
I would say that it's getting better, but a lot of companies still have no resiliency plans. They don't have a disaster recovery
Wow.
business continuity plan. It doesn't have to be this elaborate thing, but how can you get your data if it's encrypted? How can you get your data if it's not available? And so those are the things that I think are the two most important things of making sure that you're in a good position. And then you start to build out based on your risk posture. Like if you have healthcare data, credit card data, depending on what type of PII you might have,
Hmm.
because you don't have to you don't need to always like spend a gazillion dollars on something that's a really low risk. You still want to have controls and you still want to make sure you're doing the right things. But if you have an $1,000 app that brings no revenue, are you going to spend $1 million? So I talk about rational security where it's right sized for the organization, the risks
Mm,
that you have.
that makes a
Now,
lot
I
of
will
sense.
say some small companies have just as many risks as big companies, but
Sure.
that's like an individual conversation that you can have with your security partners, and really have that trusted advisor that's really giving you good advice and helping
Hmm.
you build that out.
That's amazing. Thank you, Connie.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I've learned so much from you, and I promise you, the people that are listening have learned a lot too. And I promise you, there are going to be lots of folks, especially younger folks, that would aspire to, walk in your footsteps. Given
They can
that,
do it.
but to your point, what advice would you give someone that's eager to walk in your footsteps? Especially those that are early on in their careers.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have to, regardless of our age, we have to be confident in ourselves. Because if you're not confident, you're not really showing up with the best version of you. And
Well
I
said.
think if you really want to grow more rapidly in your career, you need to find coaches and mentors that can support you, because not everyone's good at everything. So you may have 4 or 5 mentors. But I also think when you get engaged with mentors, you need to listen. I'm not telling you should take all their advice, but people a lot of times are going to be sharing things with you from experience. And for me, if I can share my experience and someone can avoid that pitfall in their career, that makes me happy that I can help them. I'm not saying they're going to handle it exactly the way I am, but
Hmm.
sometimes I find with younger people, they think they have all the answers. But you know what? When we were young, we thought the same thing. So that's my biggest advice is like, just be open to constructive feedback too. I mean, there are people that are just going to be idiots, and you don't want those people in your lives. But when
Right.
people truly genuinely care about you and they provide you constructive feedback, they really are trying to help you. They're not trying to say you're dumb or you don't know what you're talking about. Because I mean, we can still admit it. I'm 55. I still learn stuff in my age. I learned stuff from
Oh
younger
yeah.
people that I never would have thought of. I don't necessarily always agree with it, but I'm still learning from a
Hmm.
variety of people. And also, just don't ever give up. Just keep pursuing your dreams. And you may
Hmm.
get knocked down a couple of times, but honestly, if you just don't give up, eventually it will come. And I will say in my life, I have always been a very hard worker, and I may not have been the person that escalated the quickest and fastest, but it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And to me, like, when you work through all of those and you grow and you continuously have that improvement, it's a lot easier to stay on the top than when you go from 0 to 100 with no learning experiences in between.
Wow, that is so amazing. Thank you, Connie. You
Yeah, no
are you
problem.
are truly inspirational.
Oh, thank you.
And speaking of mentors and mentorship, I count myself lucky to include a badass like yourself in my tribe of mentors.
Well,
So
thank
thank
you.
you, Connie. Yeah, this has been great.
And thank you
Um,
so much for having me. It was fun.
my pleasure, my pleasure. I will talk with you very, very soon, my friend.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.